twice tweet stormed about the Twitter files. And Jay, your name came up. Tell us how you felt about that and exactly what you found that they did.
Well, it turns out, James, I'm on a blacklist, which I thought the United States had sort of put behind us in like the 1950s, but I guess that's the modern way now. I'm not sure exactly what that means, but it can't be good. I've been on Twitter for about a year. In 2020, when I wrote the Great Barrington Declaration, I wasn't on Twitter. I figured, the message, I could get the message out without Twitter. I'm an academic, James. I don't really, my goal wasn't to learn how to manage media. So I was never on Twitter before. But in 2021, I joined. And I've had some success, but I applied 3 times to get verified and they turned me down. That little blue check mark you can, where like you're official and all that. And then
because who had ever heard of you, Jay? Let's face it. You got up to 200,000 and plus followers in just like that. You were all over the national news. Who would ever have heard of you at Twitter headquarters?
It's kind of it's basically a social credit system, right? It's a system designed to tell people, look, I'm bad. I'm dangerous ideas. Don't listen to me. And I think that's really the purpose of something like that. Like it's not possible with the internet to squelch ideas if they happen. What happens with this kind of mechanism of social control is to tell the world this idea is too dangerous to discuss. This person is too dangerous to think about or listen to. In 2020, after we wrote the Great Barrington Declaration, 4 days after we wrote it, Tony Fauci got an email from Francis Collins, the head of the National Institute of Health. And it called me, the other 2 signatories, the main authors of the Great Barrington Declaration, Martin Kulldorff from Harvard and Sunetra Gupta from Oxford. He called the 3 of us fringe epidemiologists.
So I just want to back up for the people who aren't familiar with the particulars of it. The reason that they wanted to call you fringe and put together a devastating response to deplatform you or suppress your ideas, what was it in the GBD that made their hair stand up?
The main problem in the GBD, the reason why the NIH, Francis Collins and Tony Fauci reacted this way, was that it posed a challenge to their authority. The main problem for them was the location of the people signing it and writing it. Nobel Prize winner signed it. We had tens of thousands of doctors and epidemiologists signed it. And the main authors are from Harvard, Stanford, and Oxford. If that's true, that there's that lockdown isn't the only scientific way, that there isn't a consensus on lockdown, then what are they doing telling the world that the only way to address the pandemic was a lockdown? The problem for the GBD for them was that it shattered the illusion of consensus that they wanted to maintain in order to get their way on policy. That's why they organized the devastating takedown of the premises. That's why they organized the propaganda campaign. In the UK, we now know that Matt Hancock, the chief health minister at the time, engaged specifically propaganda techniques from within the government in order to suppress the spread of the ideas of the Great Barrington Declaration, to delegitimize and smear its authors, and specifically Sunetra Gupta, who teaches at Oxford University. She's a professor of theoretical epidemiology at Oxford. So it was.
Hold on, you're moving a little fast on Sunetra. Sunetra Gupta doesn't just teach at Oxford. Sunetra Gupta is one of the leading epidemiologists on the face of the planet. Is that not correct, Jay?
I think she's the most important epidemiologist in the world. The most.
And Boris Johnson, then the Prime Minister of Great Britain, had Sunetra Gupta come into number 10 Downing Street to counsel and advise him. And Matt Hancock and others in the official health apparatus of Great Britain didn't like the advice that she was giving to the Prime Minister, and they engaged, as you say, in an orchestrated, intentional, designed propaganda campaign to smear her and to suppress her ideas, which were your ideas, correct?
Yeah, that's exactly what happened in the UK.
Okay.
In the US, we have the devastating takedown.
You've lived through this, so you're sort of used to what happened. I want to restate the enormities of what's taken place here once or twice. It's just unbelievable. All right.
Yeah, it is absolutely
Can
remarkable.
we also, Dr. Fauci, 2 things have happened in the last couple of weeks that concern you. One is that Dr. Anthony Fauci was deposed by several states' attorneys general. And Dr. Fauci was asked about Jay Bhattacharya. As I recall, he was asked, are you aware, he had signed on to the notion that you were a fringe epidemiologist. And they asked him if he was aware of your credentials. And he said?
He said he had no idea what my credentials were. Although how he would know to say I was a fringe epidemiologist and also not know what my credentials were, or Sinetra's credentials, or Martin's credentials, Martin Kulldorff of Harvard, a biostatistician, a full professor at Harvard then, still, actually. So he didn't know any of our credentials. In fact, it was remarkable, Peter. He didn't know a whole lot of things. He couldn't recall talking with Mark Zuckerberg, even though there's emails showing that he talked with Zuckerberg probably about censorship. Couldn't recall even what Twitter was, even though his daughter worked at Twitter or something like that. I mean, it was like 195 times in the 7-hour deposition. He said, I don't recall, I don't know. Why did he change his mind on masks in 2020? Well, I don't know. I mean, he couldn't remember the papers that made him change his mind from like masks are bad for you in February to masks are good for you in March. We put our faith in these scientific bureaucrats to manage the scientific bureaucracy, which is tremendously important. Basically, every biomedical scientist would know gets support from the NIH. When these officials abuse the power in this way, it's not just that there's a censorship regime. It's not just that there's a propaganda regime. It sends a signal to other scientists to stay quiet. Like it's a nice career you got there. Would be shame if something were to happen to it. Because they don't just give funding; they give social status to scientists. I don't get tenure at Stanford if I don't have NIH funding.
Jay, you said we put our trust in these public health bureaucrats, but Jay, my friend, you put your trust in them at first as well. I remember saying, Jay, what do these people think? Excuse me, for the benefit of our listeners, Jay Bhattacharya, Jay's one of my best friends here at the Stanford campus. And during the COVID lockdown, when we were all supposedly banned from the campus, Jay and I would slink off and have cups of coffee together to keep each other sane, or at least he was kind enough to keep me sane. And your first impulse was to extend a kind of generous patience to these people. Oh, I'm sure Fauci is doing the best he can. It's just that the correct data isn't reaching him. Over and over again, I was ready to rise up with a pitchfork and march on Washington after these people. And you kept saying, no, it just takes, if only there's art. And your opening position was, let's be patient with them. They're overwhelmed. They're in a difficult position, but they're good people. And they're operating a public health structure which is fundamentally sound. When did you decide that that was just not the case?
It took me a while, Peter. I mean, I've lived in this area for a very long time. I've worked in this area. It's hard for me to think about fellow scientists as not operating in good faith. Science absolutely requires that I assume the good faith of people who disagree with me, that they're doing it because they have legitimate intellectual reasons to disagree with me. It can't work if there's no good faith. It can't. And if the leaders of the scientific bureaucracies and professions act in ways that abuse their power, it destroys the possibility of good faith. That's the realization I've come through during the pandemic. I mean, I look back at those. I mean, I think I was naive, Peter, in those conversations, but I don't think I was wrongly naive. I think
if you'd listen to me sooner, buddy.
I think you have to have some kind of assumption of good faith if science is to work. And I hope that we can get back to that. I mean, like what's happened during COVID is you have essentially scientific leaders, scientific bureaucrats creating a situation where scientists can't think that their interlocutors are engaging in good faith. We have to disagree with each other as scientists. That's what we do. It's that disagreement that leads to discovery. And we look at data together, try to interpret it, and try to come to some sort of consensus conclusion about it. I mean, it's hard, but if I think that the other person on the other side of the discussion essentially wants to do a devastating takedown of me instead of an actual discussion, a good faith discussion that might convince him that he's wrong, or might convince me that I'm wrong, well, we can't do science. And if Twitter then turns around and puts me on a blacklist, very likely at the behest of the government, I mean, we don't know that for certain, but it seems likely. that is a violation of my civil rights. That's a violation of my free speech rights. And that consequences of that, not just for me, is because we have this tremendous policy going on, these lockdowns that damage the lives of children, the poor, the working class around the world. There needed to be an honest, open discussion. I mean, I was fortunate enough to be sort of at the front lines of the other side of that discussion, but the world was denied that by the actions of Twitter and by the suppression actions that the governments took around the world, especially the American government, I think the UK government.
Ricochet. Join the conversation.